Hi guys, in this video we're going to learn all about integers. An integer is a whole number. So that's a number without a decimal part to it. So let's go ahead and store some examples of integers. Let's make a variable called num1, and the first integer I'm going to store 10. Let's store another one. This time we'll have 80. Third one, let's go for 498, and let's do one more just because I want to show you that integers can also be negative numbers. But notice none of these have got decimal places after them. Remember, integers are whole numbers. Now, one of the things you can do with integers is counting. So let's say that I had a variable called count, and we'll start it at 0. And I'm going to go ahead and print the value of count. Let's run that just so we can see it working. It prints 0. Now let's do some more things with that count variable. So let's say that in your program you want to add something to the value of count. Well, we can do that very simply by putting the name of the variable plus equals. So let's add a 1. If I run that again, we can see that count is now 1. Let's add another value. Let's add 10 this time. And now we can see the value is 11. Now we can also do count minus equals, which does exactly what you'd expect. Let's put 5, run it again, and now you can see that count is 6. We can also do this technique using multiply. So if I say count times equals 10, it's currently 6, remember, so now it's 60. And yes, we can also do count divide equals. So let's put 6, run it again, and now we can see that count is 10. However, this video is all about integers, and whenever you do a division, it's worth noting that the value you get back is a float and not an integer. Watch my data type video to understand a bit more about float values, but if you look at the output, you can see that it's now 10.0, not just 10. That is now a float and not an integer. Anyway, let's carry on talking about integers. Let's look at some more things that you can do. So I'm just going to delete all of the count stuff, but I'll keep the variables at the top because I want to do some stuff with those. I now want to talk about arithmetic operators. I'm talking about adding, taking away, multiplying, dividing, but also raising numbers to the power of something, as well as some other types of division such as floor division and something called modulo division. Now don't worry about those last few if they didn't make sense right now. I'm going to go through them, but let's start with the ones that you do know. So let's have a look at how this works. For each of these examples, I'm just going to use a print function. And to start with, let's just try adding two integers. 5 plus 2. Run it, and it outputs 7. I can also, of course, use the values that are stored in those variables up the top. So I could say print num1 plus num2, and that will work in just the same way. We can also subtract numbers. So let's have another print statement. This time I'm going to do 100 take away 25. When I run it, it carries out the calculation and it gives me the answer 75. And again, I could do the same thing using values that are stored in my variables up the top. So let's say num3 take away num2, and it gives me the answer 418. Let's carry on. So another print statement. This time let's look at multiply. So let's go ahead and multiply 4 times 5. Of course, the answer is 20. And we'll do an example using the variables up the top as well. So let's say print num2 times num3. Gives us a nice big answer, 39,840. One more print statement. This time, of course, we're going to do divide. Let's do 144 divided by 12. If you know your 12 times table, of course, that's 12. Let's do one more print using the variables up the top. So for this one, we'll use num2 divided by num1. And we can see that the answer we get is 8. So we've gone over the basics: add, take away, multiply, divide. That's pretty straightforward, should seem familiar. Now let's talk about the other three. Now in math, when you raise something to a power, you're used to writing a little number in the corner. So if you were going to write 5 squared, you'd do 5 and a little 2 in the corner, which means multiply 5 by itself. If you want to do something similar using Python, we have to say 5, and then we use 2 asterisks, which means to the power of. and then we put the number that we want to raise it to. So 5 asterisk asterisk 2, try saying that fast, 5 asterisk asterisk 2 means 5 to the power of 2. So when I run it, 25. Let's go ahead and use an example from the variables up the top. So let's just say num1 to the power of 3. So that's 10 times 10 times 10, which will give us 1,000. And now on to one that you perhaps won't have come across, which is called floor division. So let's have a look at this. In here, I'm going to say print 19 divided by 4. Now, if I run this, we can see that we get the answer 4.75. Now, that's just normal division using the forward slash. If I go ahead and put in a second forward slash, I'm now performing something called floor division. And it sounds complicated, but it's really not. What it means is, only give me an integer answer, and if there's any decimal place, just discard it altogether. So instead of 4.75, the answer is now just 4. So let's go ahead and do an example using the variables. So let's go for num3 divided by num1. When we run that, we can see that we get 49.8. If we go ahead and turn that into a floor division, we'll lose the 0.8 and we get just the integer value 49. On to the final example using the modulo operator. Now this is another type of division similar to floor division in that it doesn't give us back a complete answer. It only gives us back part of the answer. So let's have a look at how it works. I'm going to say print 19 divided by 4. Now when I run that, we can see that we get 4.75 as the answer. But I want to think about this in terms of whole number and remainder. So 19 divided by 4 is actually 4 remainder 3. 4 goes into 19 4 times, giving us 16 with 3 left over. So that remainder 3 is what we're interested in. Because when we use the modulo operator, which is the percent symbol, what it does, it carries out the division, but it only gives us the remainder of the division. So remember, our answer was 4 remainder 3, and when we run it, we get just remainder 3. Let's have a look at an example using the variables. So let's say num3 divided by num1, same as before. So 498 divided by 10, well, 10 goes into 498 49 times with 8 left over. So that's remainder 8. So let's go ahead and try that with modulo, and we're expecting just the remainder, just the 8. And there we go. Now you might be thinking, well, what's the point of that? How is that useful? Let's have a look at a practical example of when you might use the modulo operator. So let's store a value in a variable called num, and let's go for 5. And let's say we want to check whether that value is odd or even. Well, that's quite straightforward using the modulo operator. If I say print num modulo 2, let's run that. So we can see the answer is 1. That tells us that there is a remainder 1. Well, that also tells us that this must be an odd number, because if it was an even number, let's say 6, then 2 would divide into it perfectly with no remainder. Now we can see it's a 0. So in fact, doing modulo 2 on any integer value tells you whether or not it's an odd or even number. Let's actually put that into an if statement so we can see it working. So let's say if num modulo 2 is equal to 1, so remember that means if we divide the number by 2 and get 1 left over, 1 remainder, we know it's an odd number. So let's print out something for the user saying it's an odd number. And let's complete that by putting an else, meaning we divided the number by 2 and it gave us no remainder. Well, in that case, we know that it's an even number. So let's run that. And now we can see that the number 6, it says it's an even number. If I change that back to the 5 so that it's an odd number and run it again, now it tells us that it's an odd number. So there you go. Various different things that you can do using integers, whole numbers. And that's how you work with integers in Python. See you next time.